Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. Let's wait a couple of minutes for more people to get settled in. Okay, maybe I should start. Okay, hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on Discover the Power and Versatility of PostgreSQL. My name is Violet, and I'm from EDB Marketing in APJ, and I am your host today. Our speaker today is Marc Linster, CTO of EDB. Before we get started, I want to go through a few housekeeping items. All your lines are muted. If you do have a question, please type it in the Q&A box found at the bottom of your screen. This webinar is recorded and we will be sharing the recording and slides with you after the session. So now, without further ado, over to you, Marc.
All right, thanks, Violet. So again, welcome and good morning. I'm joining you from the US, sort of north of Boston is where I'm based. And what I'll do today is I'll take you through our perspectives on the power and versatility of Postgres. I'll talk a little bit, promise, just a little bit about EDB, the Postgres company, and what we do and why we feel like, we are in a good position to have this discussion with you. And then obviously I'll share my excitement about Postgres and why I think this is more than just another database, and how that fits, how Postgres fits in a multi-cloud strategy and how our customers are using Postgres. As Violet said, please add questions to the Q&A. Or put them into the chat. I'll try to pick them up as we go. I want to make this as interactive and as interesting as possible, okay? So let me get started here first with a little bit about EDB. We are database fanatics. We've been around for 17 years, 17 years, working on Postgres. We've been recognized both in the market by people like Gartner, or we've been persistently in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for operational databases for a good while. And we've been, moving a little bit around that quadrant. But what's really important, if you look at that quadrant today, is the things that are not there. And the things that are not there are other open source relational databases. They've all disappeared. They were there as in earlier versions of the Gartner Magic Quadrant, and today EDB Postgres is the only thing that's left. And that's really because from an ability to execute and a completeness of vision perspective, EDB Postgres has by far outstripped other players like MariaDB or MySQL, for example. So that's on the one side, what we're doing in the market. On the other side, you can also see that we're doing a whole lot of work around the Postgres community. Now, you may wonder, why is that important? It's very important because, and I'll get back to that a little bit later, the Postgres community is the lifeblood of Postgres. And it's very important that users of Postgres or companies that are making money with Postgres also participate in Postgres. And participating doesn't just mean like putting it on the web or running it in the cloud, but actively participate in making Postgres better. Now, we may be, from a share of active contributors to Postgres 13, be the largest company. But what's really important is we're not the majority. We are one of the players in Postgres. And other players in there are people like VMware, Microsoft, Fujitsu, NTT, VMware, etc. So there's a lot of big companies that are very, very involved in Postgres. We've been at it for 17 years, and this is all we do. So Looking a little bit further into the details of Postgres, well, we've had a good number of customers today up to date. That's one thing. But what's really important, I think, for those listening to this webinar is we are very, very strong in our number of Postgres technologists today. Over 300 of us are working on Postgres today. A very high customer satisfaction rating and very, very well used by many of the Fortune 500 companies. And I'll also talk a little bit about customers that we have in Australia and New Zealand. Large number of customers deploying in the cloud. And then just to get back to the foundational stuff. So, two of the founders of the Postgres community, Postgres community was founded over 25 years ago, are today with EnterpriseDB. So, we've been successful in the market globally with companies from all around the world, going all the way from, ABN AMRO in the UK and the Netherlands to MasterCard, Santander, DHL, KT. So really all over the place where we've had a lot of good success. And what you see here in lots of different industries, very strong in financial services, but also in many other environments and also in the government sector, for example. Now, if I look especially in success in Australia and New Zealand, unfortunately, we still don't have publicly referenceable customers there, but we've been in Australia for quite a while, and we're being used in government departments that are using us to implement and manage policy changes. And that's where PostgreSQL has really helped in helping calculate and define entitlements for citizens. We're also being used in an immigration department, and in there, and I'm going to emphasize that here, we're used through what we call the EDB Postgres Advanced Server, which is our distribution of Postgres that is fully Oracle compatible. So the government department that I've talked about first is using PostgreSQL, the open source version of Postgres, together with our tools for monitoring high availability, backup recovery, etc. But the immigration department is using the Oracle compatible version of Postgres called EDB Postgres Advanced Server. That same tool is used for data processing and data warehousing capabilities by a large energy company. So again, they use the Oracle compatible distribution of Postgres. And if there's specific questions about that, please ask them, and I'll try to answer them as far as I can. Obviously, protecting the privacy of our customers here. So, getting back a little bit to the Postgres community, I mentioned that two of the founders of the Postgres community have been working with us now, and the Postgres community was created 25 years ago when Postgres was transferred from the University of Berkeley into the open source realm. Well, it's even better than that. Michael Stonebreaker, who was the initial creator of Postgres at the University of Berkeley over 25 years ago, he is today an advisor to EDB. Bruce Momjian is a member of the core team of Postgres, very actively involved in our office of the CTO. Peter Eisentraut, Robert Haas, Simon Riggs are all names that anybody who works with Postgres will know because they're all over the hackers list. They're presenting at conferences, and they've significantly driven Postgres forward during all those years. So what does that mean for what we bring to the market? Well, if you look at it today, as I mentioned, some of our customers are working with PostgreSQL. Others are working with EDB Postgres Advanced Server. EDB Postgres Advanced Server is the Oracle-compatible distribution of Postgres. PostgreSQL is the open source distribution of Postgres. So those are two variants of the database. And then we provide a number of tools to support high availability, so 4 nines or even 5 nines of availability, tools to manage the database, tools to integrate the database with other databases or other environments. Those can be replication tools, those can be foreign data wrappers, which are implementations of what's called SQL MED to give you direct access to data that is stored somewhere else, or migration tools so that you can get onto Postgres from SQL Server, from MySQL, or specifically from Oracle. So we use those two distributions of Postgres, PostgreSQL and the open source and the Oracle compatible version of Postgres, and then a number of tools for management, high availability, integration, etc. Now, they're available in a self-managed mode, right? When you download the software, you install it. You can install it on bare metal in virtualized environments, containerized environments, and I'll get onto those. I'll talk a little bit more later about those different environments where you can use Postgres. But then also very important is you can use it in a managed environment. So we just announced our EDB DBaaS called EDB Cloud. We announced it in preview on August 16th. It is available on IBM Cloud or on Alibaba's PolarDB. And on there are available the Postgres Advanced Server or PostgreSQL. So if you're interested, there are multiple different ways of getting into Postgres, both the open source version and the Oracle compatible version. So let me dive in a little bit into the excitement about Postgres and why I think Postgres is really something that is absolutely worth looking at. And I know that's why you're at this webinar here.
Mark, do you want me to push?
Oh, yes,
launch the poll?
Thank you.
Okay,
so
no
we
problem.
have a little poll here. Please, Violet. Thank you.
Okay, you should be able to see on your screen the first poll question. Which database are you currently using? Please tick as many as applicable.
And by the way, we will share these poll results with the audience afterwards. So everybody will get access to this data. It's always usually kind of interesting to see at the end of the webinar, you know, what's really out there. Am I the only one using Postgres, or is everybody using Postgres, right? Okay, Violet.
Okay.
What is our audience?
Okay, sure. So we have the majority, 75% using Postgres SQL, and then 63% using SQL Server, and 13% using Oracle. Oh, sorry, 25% using MySQL, MariaDB, and last but not least, 13% using Oracle databases.
Great. Okay, super. So it means like I'm actually preaching to the choir here. So you know, probably won't have a lot of new converts after this this conversation. Right. Thank you. Okay, so one thing that we truly believe is that Postgres is the most transformative open source technology since Linux. And you need to let that thing sink in a little bit, because think about where we were 15 years ago when Linux first really came on stage, okay? I mean, for some early adopters, Linux was there earlier. But at that point in time, it really became something that was used in enterprises, was still maybe poo-pooed a little bit. And people were thinking, oh, I can't use this. I'm going to get fired. This can't really work, right? I got to stay with VMS. I personally worked for digital equipment for a while. I have to stay with VMS or maybe open VMS, right? Or, you know, maybe I can go with Unix. I can go with HPUX or something like that. Well, where are they all? They're all gone, right? Linux is it today. That is the way the world runs. That's what containers run. So Linux has completely won this battle. Well, we're saying that Postgres is going to do the same thing. Postgres is, in our view, the most transformative open source tech since Linux. And it's time to take advantage of that because, you know, the early adopters have done it. It's now just standard technology. So if we go forward, I'll share a little bit of data with you, why we believe that is the case. First, you know, Stack Overflow does an annual survey. Here's the data of 2020. Just last week, they also published the data of 2021, and it's exactly the same thing. Postgres is, when you look across all their different dimensions, the most loved, the most used, the most wanted database, right? I mean, MySQL has a large legacy installation, but the most loved database and the most wanted database is absolutely PostgreSQL. Now, in this diagram here, Redis is still higher in most loved, but I don't really think that Redis is a database. It's an in-memory cache, okay? So that's our first data point. Second data point is on the right side, DB Engines. DB Engines ranking has ranked Postgres as the #1 database for 3 years, not in 2019, but 2017, 2018, and 2020. And you see how steeply the curve is growing. And the blue line, tiny font, is Oracle. You can actually see that Oracle's popularity is going down where Postgres is going up. Now, let's go even a little further. You may say, well, Postgres, but it's old technology. Mark, you just said it went into open source 25 years ago. That's like ancient, right? Well, but in the newest stuff on Docker, Postgres, again, is by far the most popular database. I mean, Redis, a little bit more popular, but again, I don't think it's really a database. It's an in-memory cache. So by far more popular even than other things that you would think are more adopted by developers like Mongo. No, it's Postgres, right? So Postgres is really beating all others, even in modern environments. Now let's go ultra modern. Let's go to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation's technology radar. This is from November 2020. And again, Postgres is like the thing that in cloud native computing, they are recommending as ready for adoption. It is by far the #1 database. Look, even, I mean, significantly further than MySQL. Okay, so it's just something that as we look at Postgres, it's absolutely the thing to be excited about. And when you look at the maturity of Postgres today and where it is used and why it is used, and the case studies that I talked about before in government services and immigration, in energy services, it is because it is extremely mature, extremely stable, but it's also the tech that's being used at the leading edge. Okay, so why is that the case? Why is Postgres really, I mean, some could say the Leatherman tool or the Swiss Army knife of the developer and the DBA? There's really 3 reasons for it. And those were decisions that Mike Stonebreaker and his team took many years ago. It is because Postgres is built on an object-relational data model. Now, you may say, hey, that's technobabble. Why do I care? Okay, well, you do care because that's what allows Postgres to take a leading position with tech like JSONB, PostGIS, range data types, key value pairs, etc. It makes it easy to come up with specialty data types. Now, you may say, why do I care about specialty data types? Well, you care because with the data type come indexes and operators. So now the amount of code that you write to work with an IP address or a range data type is drastically reduced because it's an operation on this data type. And you use it again and again and again and again, right? So your productivity goes up tremendously. I talked to Bruce Momsen about this once, and he said very smartly, you know, Mark, people come to us because of cost, and they stay because of innovation. And I think that is absolutely true. So once people get into Postgres, very, very few back away from it again because of the tremendous innovation. So the object-relational model is the first reason. And the second reason, this is even more technobabblish, is the POSIX interface. What's the POSIX interface? Well, it's a standard interface how applications work with operating systems, and it abstracts from all OS specifics. And that's what allows it to run on commodity hardware and on every cloud, virtually every OS, and all key hardware. Now, that is important because it gives you the portability. It allows you to develop on a Mac and deploy in the cloud. It allows you to develop on a PC and deploy in a container because Postgres doesn't make any assumptions about what's underlying it. Okay, and that's really the reason why Postgres is so successful in the cloud and on containers. And then the last thing is it's a true open source community. As I talked about it before, I mean, it's not just EDB, it's Microsoft, it's NTT, it's Fujitsu, it's VMware, it's a lot of companies that are actually working together. The only other such open source community that I'm aware of that is comparably successful is Linux. And that's why we believe that Postgres is the most transformative tech since Linux. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the cloud.
Mark, we have got the second poll now. Do you want me to launch?
Thank you. Thank you.
No worries. Okay.
Violet, I'd be talking for hours.
Okay, good. Here's another poll. Okay. Question is, are you using Postgres to replace legacy databases? Answer as many as applicable. Oh, okay. We have high number, 50, but well, over 60% saying no, they use Postgres for new developments only. And then 13% say yes with SQL Server and 13% with Oracle.
All right, thank you. Very, very interesting. And that's very much in line with, what we saw before about the use in containers and the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, because, when we started, it was really like, oh, we want to be just like Oracle. But now, as Postgres is being used for microservices, et cetera. And initially, frankly, there was a lot of doubt that a 25-year-old technology could be used for that. But, the numbers usually don't lie. And they tell a pretty good story about use of Postgres in this type of environment, right? So let's talk a little bit about Postgres and the cloud. So we all know that the exodus to public cloud is on, right? I mean, here's some stats, some data from IDC, how we see the database market size evolving. And I think this is no news that rapidly the majority of investments in databases are moving to the cloud, okay? Over 40% of EDB's customers are deploying EDB Postgres, be it PostgreSQL or the Oracle compatible version on public clouds. And Gartner believes, and we're completely in agreement with that, is that by far the majority of databases will be deployed or even migrated to the public cloud. Very few of them are going to come back. So public cloud is really definitely something that's happening. So now, I said it before, because of the POSIX interface, Postgres has become the lingua franca of databases in the cloud. Postgres is the language that every single cloud speaks. This is KT's cloud, this is Alibaba, this is Azure, this is AWS, this is Google. They all speak Postgres, okay? Now, what's important here is they speak Postgres in different versions, right? So it's not just a simple choice. You still need to decide, am I going to go with a DBaaS, so like a fully managed service? Do I want to use Kubernetes as a way to go into the cloud with Postgres, or do I want to use virtual machines? It's not an easy decision, and there's not one answer for everybody, because you really need to understand, what is my level of control that I would like to have? How agile do I want to be? How much control do I want to have? Am I open to cloud lock-in, right? If you go with something like AWS Aurora, well, there's only one place in the world where it's going to be offered. It's an interesting offering, but it only exists in one place. Think about it before you make that commitment, right? Which Postgres do I want to have, and what features do I need to have, right? I mean, the different versions of Postgres in different DBaaS services are at different levels of maturity. For example, Azure Database for Postgres, the single server version, is still on version 11. It's 2.5 years out of date. That doesn't mean it's bad, but you need to understand that, it's a little bit behind the times. And if you're committing to it, well, that's what you're committed on. Okay. You need to understand the cost and performance requirements and the implications, because they're all slightly different. So really understanding where you're going to invest and where you're going to put which system is very important. And then you need to understand your support requirements. I mean, with all respect to AWS, for example, if you go to RDS, AWS is a platform provider. They're not a software company. They're not a database company. So when you get your support for Postgres from RDS, you will get your support from a platform company. And when you look at the statistics before about the Postgres community participation, you will see that AWS is basically not in there. Okay, so AWS will not be able to help you with patches and bug fixes because they're actually not an active participant in the community. Those are things that you need to think about. RDS is a very good and very popular service, but it has its limits. If you go to Kubernetes, you have more control. You have things like very advanced operators, Kubernetes operators now, that can manage large parts of your Postgres service for you. And I'll touch on that a little bit. EDB offers EDB Cloud Native Postgres, which is a Kubernetes based deployment that is also available on all public clouds. Gives you more control, but requires less knowledge than, for example, the virtual machines deployment. The virtual machine deployment gives you even more configurability, more control. However, you also need to be in a position to exert that control, okay? So if we dive into that a little bit more, you can see that if you go with a DBaaS, yes, it's Postgres, and it gives you fast deployment, and developers are very happy because they put in a credit card, they click a button, 10 minutes later, they have a database, right? So it's very, very easy for them. But there is limited tuning capabilities, right? There's limited possibilities there to configure it in the way you want it to. And the dollars per TPS, so the cost per transaction is much higher. But you need to do less. So you just need to decide convenience or capabilities. If you go to Kubernetes, you have more flexibility and more configuration options. Still Postgres, right? You can now orchestrate everything with Kubernetes. You can get platform support from the cloud provider, and you can get Postgres support from EDB. So you can get the best of both worlds, which is very attractive to folks who really want to invest in making their Kubernetes environment as good as possible. If you go to virtual machines, you have the greatest possible control over tuning, configuration, and architecture, but you also need to have much greater knowledge to exercise that control. Okay. So EDB is playing in all of these fields. So I just said before that EDB Cloud went into preview on August 16th. So that is something where you can look at a DBaaS, a fully managed database as a service from the Postgres experts. We can help you with EDB Cloud Native Postgres on every Kubernetes environment and on all the clouds, or EDB Postgres on virtual machines, which is what we've been doing for years and is a very proven and very, very popular environment, giving you the extremely high availability, much higher than what you can get from all existing fully managed DBaaS environments. So I mentioned before that EDB Cloud, our preview started on August 16th. It's very interesting. It's a very interesting preview for a fully managed database as a service from us, from the Postgres experts. We have real good access to Postgres expertise, to the company that has the most contributors, most active contributors for Postgres. We offer a distribution of Postgres that is Oracle compatible, and Oracle compatible here means it understands PLSQL, it understands the packages, and it has 27 predefined packages. It offers drivers that are Oracle compatible, so drivers for JDBC, ODBC, .NET, even OCI drivers that are fully compatible. And then, it has really, really good continuous availability capabilities for Postgres to give you a very, very high availability for Postgres. So that's definitely something. If you're interested, let us know, and we'll contact you about participating in the preview. Okay. So now let me get into a little bit into how our customers are using Postgres.
Mark, before that, can I launch the third poll? No worries. Sorry. Okay, poll, the last one, poll number 3. We want to know how, whether you have obstacles to Postgres use in your company. Please choose as many options as possible. Okay, Mark, a majority of the people, 60% say that they lack in-house expertise. And then 40% says that my systems integration partner doesn't have Postgres expertise. Another 13% say, I don't know if Postgres can do the job. And another 13% says, I use commercial products that don't work with Postgres.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So let me just talk a little bit about those answers. I mean, the lack of Postgres expertise is often a problem, right? And the ways to address that has changed over time. When I started with Postgres, you couldn't find any Postgres books. Well, you could find, I think there was one at the time, and I actually have it here. It was Bruce Momgen's book about PostgreSQL that was published, I think, 15 years ago. It was pretty much the only Postgres book you can find today. So today, if you have lack of in-house expertise, there's really there's 3 options that we see. First, there's really, really good literature about Postgres today. I published last year a blog and a webinar about my favorite Postgres books. I'd advise you to take a look at it, because now there's Postgres books for the beginner, for the developer, for the DBA. That is all there. So that's the first thing. There's really good literature about it today, right? The second thing is, I would really advise you to work with a competent Postgres partner. Obviously, EDB can be such a partner for you, because Postgres is almost like Oracle, but it's not 100% like Oracle or SQL Server. So really having the right Postgres expertise available to give you advice, I think, is really important. And it's not just one-time advice, but advice to be there for you in initial deployment, in tuning and configuration, but also in the management. And then the last thing is, we offer remote DBA services or DBA services. And a lot of our customers use those DBA services in that first year, or sometimes multiple years, when they get into Postgres. How does that work? Well, the way it works is there is our team of DBAs working with your DBAs. We monitor your database all the time. We have a set of standard monitoring metrics that we apply all the time. And then if there's some anomaly or something, we say, hey, this query is slowed down. This table is getting too big. You might run out of space. We should configure this differently. You want us to proceed. So over time, your team will become much more competent and capable and confident in what they can do with Postgres. So, I'd really say these 3 things. There's good training available today. EDB also provides training, but good books, good training is available today. Work with a competent partner, and then consider onboarding services now, like remote DBA, to help you get there. You don't need to be on that forever, but it helps you get the confidence during especially what we call the move to production. Okay. So enough of that. Let me just talk a little bit about where Postgres shines, because that's one of the first mistakes that customers make when they get into Postgres, right? They just heard Postgres is great. Postgres can do everything. Well, There are areas where Postgres is really good and areas where Postgres is being stretched. So in this gamut here of applications, ranging all the way from the data lake to mobile computing, right, with a little description, where is Postgres really good? Where do we see Postgres succeed? And when I talk to my Postgres colleagues here, they say, well, but Postgres can do everything. I'm saying, yes, absolutely, it can do everything. But there are certain areas where it's like really, really good. Like, you know, in systems of record, that's where we've all known Postgres, right? That's where it started. The system of record are things like CRM, ERP systems, warehouse management systems, shipping systems, order management systems, etc. Right? But we're seeing today significant success with Postgres in what I call tactical analytics, meaning ODS or data marts. Okay. Now, some people also use Postgres for data warehouses, and there are people who build data lakes with Postgres, but you're really, really stretching Postgres, right, into areas where with super duper and deep expertise, you could probably do it, but it's not where Postgres is strongest. There are other players there that are stronger because they've been built for it, like Hadoop, Cassandra, Redshift, Snowflake. They really shine on that part of the gamut. If we go over to the right, okay, so systems of engagement, so websites, social media sites, etc. Well, you know, Postgres does very well there. Traditionally, that used to be the realm of MongoDB and MySQL, and we've seen great adoption growing in that space. So as an engine to support websites, social media sites, very, very interactive sites, Postgres has done very, very well there. Edge computing, okay, so data collection, IoT systems, etc. Again, Postgres has done very well there in a turf that was traditionally much more MySQL turf. Now, if we go into mobile computing, so single user type of systems, Postgres can do it. It's quite a lightweight system, but SQLite and Realm, they've been built for that. So why deal with all the overhead of multiple users and concurrency control, etc.? There are better solutions, but they're in the middle. That's where Postgres really shines, and that's where we see most use for Postgres. We share some statistics here, what customers are doing. So this is a survey from, I think, 2020 that we did with our customers and asked them, where do you use Postgres? It doesn't add up to 100% because customers use Postgres for multiple different use cases. And we can see here that 63%, so by far the majority, use Postgres for systems of record, so CRM, ERP, supply chain management, etc. 54% for tactical analytics. So data marts, operational data stores, simple things, not heavyweight analytics, not replacements for Snowflake or Cassandra or Hadoop, right? But tactical analytics. And the reason why I'm saying tactical analytics is technically Postgres under the hood, for example, is not a good solution to maintain cubes or stars, right? Because it doesn't have self-refreshing materialized views, for example. That's one of the limitations. But for tactical analytics, it does really, really well. Now, the most interesting statistic here is the systems of engagement, traditionally the turf of MySQL and Mongo. And in 3 years, that part of the triangle grew from 18% of the customers saying that they use it from that to 29%. And that is very, very much in line also with the great gains that Postgres has made in the container deployments that we talked about before. So in that space, Postgres, because it's a very, very mature JSON-B deployment capability, and because of its strong GIS capabilities through PostGIS, is really gaining significant ground. Okay, so again, this is one area. So think about this dimension that I showed before, and this here, this gives you a good idea for where people are using Postgres successfully. So now you may say, okay, but Mark, can I use Postgres for like really mission critical systems? Okay. Or can I only use it like for departmental systems? Well, let's look at that question. So this is a bit of an eye chart. It's one of my favorite charts, though, where I'm saying, and again, this is just my way of tiering the world, saying I have departmental systems, and then they become more and more mission critical. And the key number in here is the service level availability. That goes all the way from 99% to 5 nines. Okay, 5 nines only gives me like a few minutes a year where I can be down, right? 99% gives me like 4 days a year where I can be down. Okay, so how do I use Postgres in this area? Well, there are 2 Postgres technologies for high availability. There's what's called streaming replication, and there's logical replication. And they're ways part sort of at the 5 nines. You can get up to 4 nines very, very well streaming replication. And EDB offers a tool called EDB Failover Manager to help you in that space. So departmental, mission critical, and then up to mission critical, right? That's where streaming replication is often used. But then for higher availability, so the 5 nines of availability, that's where we're seeing logical replication coming in. So I don't want to go too much into the details of those 2 different technologies, but the key answer here is there is Postgres technology to allow you to use Postgres in all kinds of mission critical applications, up to 5 nines. And that's where Postgres is being used today by payment service providers, by companies who operate single sign-on environments that need to be available all the time, and other environments that basically have no downtime in digital transformation environments. Okay, so again, I've described to you in what type of applications Postgres can be used, where in the triangle people are using Postgres, to what degree, and here to say, okay, for what kind of mission critical applications can you use Postgres. I mentioned streaming replication, and EDB has a technology called EDB Failover Manager that uses streaming replication, which is natively built into Postgres, and manages that to allow you to get up to 4 nines of availability. And for many systems, that is amply sufficient. If you need to go higher than that, and if you go up to 5 nines of availability, we have a technology called Postgres BDR. BDR stands for bidirectional replication. It uses logical replication in a multi-master mesh-based architecture with a Raft consensus layer. Okay, so it brings all of those technologies together to get you up to 5 nines of availability. Now, one of the questions that we asked before is how many of you are migrating from legacy environments? Now, in the poll here, only very few, I think it was 13%, said that's what we're using Postgres for. The majority were looking at Postgres for new applications. So this may be slightly less interesting, and I won't spend too much time on it. But you can use the Oracle compatible distribution of Postgres called Postgres Advanced Server to help you with migration from Oracle, because it has native built-in Oracle compatibility with PLSQL, Oracle packages, Oracle administration tools like SQL Plus, the loader that is like the Oracle loader, and then all the APIs like Oracle compatible JDBC, ODBC, and OCI. Okay. The way this works is we took PostgreSQL and we added Oracle compatibility. So schemas, triggers, store procedures, functions, and the utilities. And then we added on top of that things like optimizer hints, which your DBAs probably really, really like. And then we added on top of that DBA productivity tools. For example, we have a capability to throttle CPU and IO at the process level. Now you may say, why is that important? Well, let me give you one example where it's really important. If you have an interactive web system that also does some batch processing, meaning every once in a while it recalculates available stock or it loads data in. If you can't throttle CPU and IO at the process level, Then the batch process that does the recalculation of the available stocking levels will, whenever it runs, suck up all the CPU and the IO. And the interactive traffic will suffer. Now, your DBAs and developers will assume that Postgres has that because Oracle has it and SQL Server has it. But standard Postgres, open source Postgres doesn't have it. So we added these things to help a DBA successfully manage complex systems. We added then, developer productivity features. So all the packages, nested tables, autonomous transaction, again, is a favorite Oracle feature that a lot of people use, not available in standard Postgres. And then we added additional security capabilities on top of that, okay? So really, these capabilities that we brought together now allow us to say that, as I said before, Postgres is the most transformative open source tech since Linux. We are convinced of that. And EDB's job is to make it enterprise ready. And that's what we're here to do with you. So there were questions before about training and practice sessions, and I'll get to that in a second, but because that's all part of what is needed to make Postgres enterprise ready. Because the questions that you had before and the comments or the data that we saw in the survey is absolutely clear. If you don't have enough Postgres know-how in the company, it's very, very difficult to take advantage of what I call the most transformative open source tech since Linux. So let me just get to the conclusion here a little bit. I can't emphasize enough, it's the best and most transformative tech since Linux. Use it, because otherwise you're going to suffer the same fate that those who didn't use Linux suffered. It runs in every cloud, public or private. So if you want to run it on OpenShift or Rancher or on any cloud, it's there for you. We have a good number of customers who now said we are standardizing on the Postgres API. We're telling all of our developers that they need to code to the Postgres API. Because once you do that, then you can run your application anywhere. OpenShift, Rancher, any cloud, managed service, self-managed service, you can do all of that. Just commit to the Postgres API. At that point in time, you can work with somebody like EDB to help you, or you can do it yourself, or you can go to, I don't know, Amazon or Microsoft or NTT or Fujitsu. Just commit to the Postgres API. And the capabilities that it has, especially the object-relational model, has really helped it win the battle for the hearts and minds of DBAs and developers. That's why it is so successful in containers and in cloud-native environments. Statistics tell us today that it easily covers 90+% of all database use cases. But very important, I can't emphasize it enough, is choose the right partner to do it. Okay, so let me get to the questions now. I think there was one here.
Yes,
Okay.
Mark, I think Hayden has answered it. Do you want me to read it out again?
Yeah, let me just so
okay.
Yeah, it was a question about old Postgres drivers, right?
Yes.
So yeah, Hayden is absolutely right. And Hayden, for those of you who don't know him, he's our sales engineering leader for the Australia and New Zealand region. And he is absolutely right in his answer here. 9.4 is out of date. It's really important that you upgrade. Out of date is, I don't want to scare you, right? Because if you're on Postgres 9.4, 9.6 or 10, which are the supported versions, are not going to cost you a dime, right? So, but I really urge you to upgrade, because if you're on 9.4, nobody's going to provide security patches for you. So if there's a known issue, well, first, you won't know about it. And second, nobody will help you with it. So it's really, really important to upgrade. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, if you can get the old driver, use the old driver, right? I mean, I don't want to recommend using old tech, right? But I would not use a newer driver with the old technology, at least not unless you can really test it and make sure that it doesn't get you in trouble, right? Because the API does change, versions do change, and I would recommend that you would you'd use the newer version. So there's a question about the resources that are available for students to practice Postgres. Well, first thing is, if you're a student, I would highly recommend to take a look at the webinar that I gave last year about my favorite Postgres books. The reason is not that I think it's like the world's greatest webinar, but because I took some time to go through and say, hey, there are different types of books. Like, there are books for the beginner who's just getting into Postgres, right? And wants to figure out, okay, what do I do to get up and running with Postgres, right? And for that, you have like really thin books, right? Just 100 pages, okay? So it's really easy to get up and running with Postgres, right? And then there are books that are like for the Postgres developer, right? There are books full of code, but don't start with them because you'll get overwhelmed, okay? Then Simon Riggs, who also works for EDB, he's published a book, I think it's the Postgres DBA's cookbook, which is not for somebody who's developing systems, but it's for somebody who's running systems. So start there. Those are good resources to learn. Then I would say every cloud provider today who's providing a managed service for Postgres also has, free tiers of Postgres available for you. So that's the playground, the ideal playground. And then go to edbpostgres.com edbpostgres.com, so to enterprisedb.com, and take advantage of the free training. I mean, there's a whole bunch of free training available for you there that you can use. And then on EDB Docs, there is, so that's enterprisedb.com/docs. There's a whole lot of code samples and things to do there. And then if you look at our blog, there's a section of the blog that is entirely devoted to tutorials. That's where you learn coding tricks and how to do things, how to use partitioning, how to write PLPG-SQL code, etc. So start with the books, use the free tier, take the free training, and look at EDB Docs to really get as much free knowledge as you can get.
Thank you, Mark. I think we only have time for maybe one or two more questions. I'd like to read out this one that was sent beforehand. It says, you released the preview for EDB Crowd in August. When will EDB Crowd be GA?
Well, we're planning on GA in October. So that's our plan for the general availability of Postgres. But the way it is with software, that's our plan, right? And right now is the time for folks to take it, to try it out, get us some feedback, get us their perspective. But our plan is to make EDB Cloud generally available in October.
Thank you, Mark. And then also, how can I sign up for the EDB Crowd preview?
Just send us an email at info@enterprisedb.com.
Thank you, Mark.
Put your email address with a comment into the questions, and we'll make sure that you get the right email address.
Thank you. I think we are at the top of the hour, and I just want to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded, and we will share the recording as well as the slides with you following this webinar. And also, as Mark has mentioned, I will include the link to the webinar that Mark did some time back on the books that he recommended for Postgres. So that will also be included in the post-webinar emails to you. Also, another announcement, Mark mentioned about BDR for continuous availability. I'd just like to invite everyone to also sign up for the next webinar where you can learn more about BDR on September 2nd. It's called Ensuring Your Business is Always On with EDB BDR. So do check that out on the EDB website under webinars and sign up. So I think we are at the top of the hour. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Hayden. And thank you all for joining. Do hear from us for the recording and slides for this webinar. Thank you all. Have a good day. Thanks. Bye.